There's a story that you cannot find in history books. It's a terrible truth, only whispered in the nooks, crannies and crevices of my haunted hometown. The Pendle witches were innocent, but the real witch still lives in the forest of Bowland. My name's Thomas, and I grew up in Barley, which is a picturesque English village in the beautiful borough of Pendle. You might never have heard of the Pendle hangings. Even if you do know about the famous witch trials of the 17th century, I doubt you believe in superstitious nonsense. And I'm sure you would say that the hangings were the mark of an uncivilized era. You wouldn't be wholly wrong. It's ghastly that throughout history, so many innocent people were sentenced to death on the basis of unfounded witchcraft accusations. That being said, all myths start somewhere. And if you'd ever stumbled across a certain rickety house in the hollow heart of Bowland Forest, you would know that. "Watch out, Sammy! The Pendle witches might turn you into a toad." I giggled as my 4-year-old sister nearly tripped over a small frog by our local pond. I was 6 years old at the time, and I'll never forget the way my grandpa looked at me. His eyes were swimming with a mixture of dread and fury. He seized my tiny wrist in his arthritic fingers and left a mark that didn't fade for days. "Don't you ever joke about that," he snarled. "Grandpa, you're hurting me," I whined. My sister, Samantha, had stopped playing. We both quivered in the towering shadow of the old man. "Aye? Good. That'll help you remember this lesson. There's only one witch of Pendle. She was never tried, and she never died. I don't ever want to hear you kids mention witches again. Understand?" My little sister was sobbing, but I fiercely eyed the old man. I hated my grandpa. He was beyond cruel. Still, the aged monster was certainly not creative enough to tell tall tales, and he was no liar, though I didn't realise that as a child. At the time, he seemed far more fearsome than any witch. "Get off me!" I demanded. My grandpa reluctantly released my wrist, seemingly satisfied that he had disparaged us from ever mentioning witches again. I complained to my parents, and we didn't spend weekends at the old man's house after that. "But we do still live in the same village," my mother pointed out. "You won't avoid him forever." Just watch me. I remember thinking that. Dad pulled me aside after Mum left the room. "Listen, Tommy, I hate my father-in-law as much as you, okay? He's always been an idiot. Don't let your mum know I said that," he whispered. I gleefully grinned. Then, my father's expression changed. It sank into a forlorn frown. I'd never seen the man look so stern. He was always soft, happy, clownish. However, I will say that I also don't want you to talk about the witch again. Okay, Tommy? Some things are better left alone, my father said. And I trusted him. I trusted the absent, haunted look in his eyes. I did as he instructed. I packaged the Pendle witch into a concealed compartment of my mind for 8 years. Of course, I grew up in Pendle, so it was hard to avoid general talk of witches, especially at Halloween. That being said, in the years following my dreadful encounter with my grandfather, I did start to notice that adults in Barley became clammy and irritated whenever the dreaded W word appeared in conversation. I never understood why the grown-ups of Barley shunned the topic. I didn't hear of the real witch again until I went to a sleepover with my 4 closest friends. I suppose we were still young and foolish enough to find the mythology fascinating, and at the age of 14, we were fueled by testosterone. We relished in the act of discussing something forbidden. As hard as I try, I still haven't forgotten that weekend in December. The year was 2009. It was the coldest winter in decades. Why we chose to sleep in a treehouse on such a brutal evening, I'll never know. It was another way of proving to ourselves that we were strong. We weren't children. We gathered in a cross-legged circle and regaled one another with ghoulish ghost stories by torchlight. At first it may have even been thrilling, but it's so hard to recall. Everything afterwards was so horrible. The weekend's dark decline started with Michael's story. "There is a forest," he began. "Oh, for crying out loud, not this again," Jack groaned. What?" Gareth asked. "Don't encourage him." "I'm not sure you've got the stomach for this one, Gaz." Michael laughed menacingly. Bradley was snoring serenely, and I still envy him for that. I often wonder who I'd be if I'd missed Michael's story too. "What about you, Tommy?" Michael asked. I shrugged. "Whatever we say, we're going to hear it, so just get on with it." Jack nodded, seconding what I said as he scrolled through his flip phone. Gareth simply lay on his front, perching on his elbows. I was cocooned in my sleeping bag, ignoring the brisk breeze that seeped through the cracks of Michael's flimsy treehouse. And something stirred in my memories. I knew the story he was going to tell. "There once was a witch who lived in Pendle," Michael started. What?" Gareth interjected. "We all know about the Pendle witches." Michael glared at him. "Did I say anything about witches, dimwit? No, I said witch. Now shut up and listen. In 1612, 12 innocent women were convicted of 10 murders and tried for witchcraft. In the modern age, many believe that not a single one of them ever harmed a soul. Because witches aren't real, you tool, Jack said, looking down at his phone and typing away. Michael laughed maniacally. "No, Jack, that's not why they were innocent. The people simply hanged the wrong women. There was only ever one Pendle witch, and she's still out there. She lives in the forest of Boland." "Whoa, hold up," Gareth said, sitting up. "This happened in 1612. So she's like 400 years old, right?" "Older than that," Michael said. "Okay. Is that it? Is that the story?" Gareth asked. Jack nodded, still not looking up from his phone. "Yep, that's the entire terrible story." "My grandpa told me about her," I finally said, once I'd cleared my throat of the stubborn lump that was blocking it. "Why have I never heard of this?" Gareth laughed. "That's way cooler than the original story about the Pendle witches." "The original isn't a story, numpty. It's history. People were hanged. Show some respect," I said. "Ooh," Jack mocked, giggling. "Yeah, Gareth, show some respect." "Seriously, why haven't I heard it before?" Gareth asked. "Oh, because you didn't grow up in Barley, Gareth," Jack explained, still absorbed in his phone and utterly disinterested in the topic of conversation. That's what Michael always reminds me. I moved here from Clitheroe and outsiders just don't get it. Oh, what do you mean? Gareth asked. Barley grown-ups tell children that dumb story, I explained, shrugging. It's a rite of passage or something. I can't wait to traumatise my kids with it. Yeah, you guys are weird, Gareth laughed. This village has a real hot fuzz vibe. Then move back to Chorley, Michael barked. And did I say I'd finish the story? Yes, Jack replied. No, Michael said. There's a part that even you haven't heard, Jack. Oh, well, please do enlighten us, Jack mocked, rolling his eyes. Michael grinned. I know where the witch lives. Gareth sat, slack-jawed, staring at his idol in eager anticipation. I don't know why I believed him without question. It was some sort of barley-bred intuition. Something innate, perhaps. I tried to suppress the wave of nausea, but Jack's reaction was the most surprising. He put his phone down. Nonsense, he said. You're really going to give us an opportunity to call you out on one of your lies? You're going to give us a location that we can visit to prove that you're full of... It's not a lie, Michael assured us. She lives in Bowland Forest, and I know how to find her house. How? Jack queried, narrowing his eyes disbelievingly. It's a long-kept Barley secret, Michael explained. That's why only people from our village wet their pants at the mention of Pendle witches. Only we know that one witch really exists. Only we know where she exists. Yes, Bowland Forest. Are you saying you know where to find her within the forest? I asked. Michael nodded. Do you remember Mr. Henderson, our old history teacher? Yes, Jack said. Well, I saw him in the pub last Wednesday. He was alone in the corner, crying. Mrs. Henderson was at home, of course. He's in the pub most days, apparently, Michael explained. He's not been the same since Millie went missing. Whoa, Jack interjected. Stop there. We put up with a lot of your nonsense, Michael. I'm not going to let you bring a real-life story into this little ghost tale. That's messed up. We all knew Millie. She was a mate. Michael vehemently slammed his fist against the hardwood floor of the treehouse. For a second, it felt as if the whole structure might crumble. It's not a story, Michael growled. This is why I invited all of you here tonight. You see, I learned something. I talked to Mr. Henderson. Rick dared me. Rick was Michael's older brother. Not the kindest person in the world. You might be able to imagine what we called him behind his back. There's a lovely noun which rhymes with his name. And what did Mr. Henderson say? Gareth asked, anxiously biting his nails. I asked him how he was doing, Michael continued. I said I missed Millie. I wasn't an arse, alright? I only went over to shut Rick up. I was nice to Mr. Henderson. I didn't expect him to open up. And he opened up. He really opened up. Just say it, Jack sighed. Okay. He told me that he and Millie went on a Bowland hiking weekend. But they weren't really hiking. They were looking for something. See, Mr. Henderson comes from a long line of Hendersons, one of the oldest families in Bali, and they've been spreading a warning for generations. Ever since the 1600s, his family has been telling the villagers of Bali to stay away from Bowland Forest. William Henderson, his ancestor, was the only person to ever see the witch and live to tell the tale. He wanted everyone in Barley to know about her. He wanted everyone to stay away. And they listened. Folk from other towns discredited him because the Pendle witches had recently been tried and hanged. But William was respected in our village. People trusted him and heeded his warning. Some new law. Fantastic, Jack sarcastically said. Michael ignored him. When Mr. Henderson, our Mr. Henderson, heard that story from his father, he became obsessed. You see, hundreds of years ago, William told his son something that he didn't tell the rest of the villagers in Barley. A secret kept in his family for centuries. I'm not sure why Mr. Henderson finally spilled the beans to me. He seemed lonely, burdened. Anyway, William told his son something that he didn't tell his friends and neighbours, fearful that they might feel brave enough to do something about it. He told his son where the witch lived. And that knowledge has been passed from father to son for 400 years. When Mr. Henderson learned this family secret, he wanted to prove that the witch was still out there. But Millie found his research, and she begged him to let her tag along. She wanted to prove the existence of the witch too. And her father just let her come with him, I asked, choking on my own words. He said he was excited, Michael explained. He wanted to share the adventure with his daughter. He didn't heed his own father's warning. He didn't see any danger. Mr. Henderson told me that he still didn't truly believe in the witch. He was just happy to have a fun weekend with Millie.
Is that all he told you?
Gareth asked. Michael shook his head. No, he told me that they found it. They found a house in the heart of the Bowland Forest. They found the witch.
Mr. Henderson did not say that,
Jack scoffed, but even his steady voice seemed to be waning. Oh, he did, Michael assured Jack. And the witch took Millie.
Just took her?
Gareth gulped. I tried to ask him what happened, Michael replied. He wouldn't tell me. He said that he'd already spoken too much. He told me that some questions weren't worth answering. That, he said, was what he had finally learned. Wow, Jack said, collapsing onto his sleeping bag. Okay, I take it all back. You should work on the ending, but that was a good horror story. I'm still not happy that you brought Millie into it, though. Yeah, Gareth shuddered, crawling into his own bag. I think I'm ready to call it a night before I wet my sleeping bag. Gareth and Jack fell silent, but Michael and I were still sitting in our bags. My friend looked at me with the most petrified eyes. It was a look I'd seen in the faces of my grandpa and my father. It's not a story, Michael whispered, before lying down and turning off the lamp beside him. I sat for a while longer. It's not about the words, it's about the feeling. Michael was right. It's something only Barley folk can understand. Like my friend, I'd caught the fever. I'd seen the witch. Not physically, but in my mind. In my dreams. She felt real to me. I didn't need to go to the heart of Bowland Forest to prove her existence. I already believed. The next morning, I woke to the startling sensation of something bulky landing on my chest. It was my rucksack. Oh, what's this? We going on a hike? Bradley asked, throwing his bag off his body. Michael was dressed in full hiking gear and standing by the open trapdoor. "Ah, morning, Bradley. You slept through a weird story last night, mate." Gareth laughed, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "The Pendle witch," Jack clarified. "Ah, right. Bit old for ghost stories, aren't we, lads?" Bradley chuckled. "You'll grow up eventually. Don't worry." You're the same age as us, Bradley," Jack said. "Anyway, you missed the juicy part of the tale. Michael's updated the legend. He added a pretty freaky ending, actually. A spooky retelling. I was impressed." "It's real," Michael coldly explained. "And we're going to find her." Who?" Bradley asked, snorting with laughter. "Millie," Michael answered. Everybody fell silent. Jack scolded him. "Michael, don't be an idiot, man. You're pushing it too far now, okay? The girl's dead. We don't know that. Look, Mr. Henderson told me everything that I told you last night. Whether you believe it or not, I don't give one. I know Tommy believes me," Michael said. All eyes were on me. I looked down at the rucksack on my lap. "Yeah, I do," I said. "Well, something bad happened to Millie in the forest. So why would we want to go there?" "Yeah, witch or no witch, I'm gonna pass," Bradley said. "I don't want to find a dead body." "You were just saying that we all needed to grow up," Michael pointed out. "And nobody ever found her body. She's still out there. She might even be alive." She wasn't. Even then, I knew that. But I also knew that Michael loved her. He'd always loved her. Millie had softened his coarseness, and he'd rapidly returned to being a full-blown idiot after her disappearance. But it wasn't just about finding our friend. As had been the case with Mr. Henderson, Michael was obsessed. He had the itch, the bug. He needed to find the witch. And then I had a horrible thought, a thought that drained me. Is that what the witch wants? Is that how she finds prey? She weasels into their heads and lures them to her lair. "A group of 14-year-olds searching for a dead body in the forest. Gareth said. "Sounds like Stand By Me." Everything's a reference with this guy," Bradley laughed. "Forget it, lads. I'm going home. I'll tell the villagers of Barley about your brave sacrifice. Safe travels, my friends." And then Bradley slipped through the trapdoor. "Whatever. That fat lazy oaf would only slow us down," Michael said. His words were pure vitriol. His eyes were bloodshot. It looked as if he hadn't slept all night, and I'd barely managed more than a couple of hours. There was no way I would want to go on a hike in that sleep-deprived state, but I had the same excuse as any typical 14-year-old. My parents won't let me," I said. "Oh, shut up," Michael moaned. "I got your precious permission slips, boys. My folks rang your parents last night." "How do we even get to Bowland Forest, mate?" Jack pointed out. "It's a bit far on foot."
"Ready, smooth brains?"
came a voice from outside. We all gathered around the open trapdoor and gazed down to see Rick standing at the foot of the tree. There was a set of car keys dangling from his fingers. It was at that moment I realised I had no escape. Michael wasn't going to take no for an answer. In the 10 years we had been friends, he had never taken no for an answer. And yet naively I had hoped that day would be the exception. As everyone started climbing down the ladder, I remember silently pleading with Michael to call off the search. I pleaded with my watery eyes. For a moment, his expression almost seemed apologetic. It was as if he were under the witch's spell. He had no say in the matter. Michael probably would have let Gareth or Jack walk away if they'd really wanted to do so. But he never did anything without me. After all, what is a shepherd without his flock? We all piled into Rick's battered camper van, bringing rucksacks filled with supplies that Michael had gathered before we even woke up. Gazing longingly from the passenger windows, like captives, we waved goodbye to our parents. They were standing in the front yard of Michael's house. Everything was arranged. Our parents were happy for us to go camping, as long as Rick and Stacey, his doting girlfriend, chaperoned us and brought us home before 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. I watched Pendle Hill from the car window and thought about how spectacular it looked in the early morning sun. I wished, more than anything, that we were simply going on a pleasant stroll up there, somewhere out in the open, near civilization. Anywhere but the forest.
Hey Rick, haven't you got anything better to do than hanging out with a bunch of 14-year-olds?
Jack teased, making Gareth snort. Yeah, Rick replied. I'm going to feed you babies to the witch. That sounds like a way to get out babysitting.
Rick, don't be mean. They're just kids, Stacey protested.
Aren't you guys only like 18? Gareth asked. 19? Rick corrected.
Oh, sorry, Mr. 19-year-old, Gareth responded, making Jack laugh.
Ah, you two make a cute couple, Rick retorted, which silenced Gareth and Jack for a while. I always sensed some chemistry between my two friends, so I wouldn't be surprised if homophobic Rick had been onto something.
Why do you boys want to go camping?
Stacey asked. Shouldn't you be busy playing Call of Duty or something? We're just going on a hike, Michael calmly said, as he stared out the passenger window with an eerie vacancy. I don't believe you, Rick replied, shaking his head. You're a bad liar, little brother. How about you shut up and mind your own business? Michael asked. Whoa, whoa! How about you remember who's driving you to your little sleepover spot? Rick pointed out. Anyway, I know you're looking for the witch. Bradley told me before he left. Michael didn't say anything. He just continued to watch the scenery float past the window. I don't really care. Stacey and I won't be joining you on your little hike, though. We'll be staying behind and having some, alone time, Rick said. Michael scowled.
What? But Mum said...
Yeah, I know, Rick interrupted. We'll set up camp and make some food whilst you go on your little adventure. So don't walk too far, okay? I don't want to have to go looking for you in that creepy forest. Michael sighed. Fine. Just don't eat everything whilst we're gone, fatso. Screw you, Rick laughed. I won't tell you where we camped. I don't want some ignorant person to stumble across this story and decide to find the witch. As we approached the campsite, Rick became kinder than usual. The teasing started to fade as we approached the forest. Like Michael and me, he grew quiet. He was a Barley boy, after all. He might not have known Mr. Henderson's secret, but everybody in the village feels something about the witch. You've got 2 hours, Rick said, as he and Stacey started to pitch the tents.
Oh, that's not enough time,
Michael protested, clicking together the rucksack straps across his chest. 2 hours, Rick repeated fiercely. We didn't question him. Everyone was on edge. Even Jack and Gareth seemed to sense that something was wrong with the Barley kids. They looked a little nervous. We'd clearly infected them with our superstitious fear. So, we just blindly walk through the woods? Jack asked. Anderson told me where to go, Michael explained. You don't have a map or something? Gareth asked. No, Gareth, I don't have a map to the witch's house, Michael said. Let me guess, Jack sighed. It's a barley thing. Michael didn't respond. I was walking at the back of the group as we zigzagged between the ceaseless cluster of birch trees. Gareth turned to face me. What's the time, Tommy? He asked. My phone's dead. Already? Jack laughed. You wouldn't last 2 seconds on your own. Oh, shut up. I would have charged it before we left, but somebody didn't even tell us we were going on a camping trip this weekend, Gareth shouted. Nobody forced you, Michael said. Well, that's not true. You always force Tommy. He feels sorry for you. We all do. So we go along with what you say, Jack said. I'm just the alpha of the group and you'd all be lost without me, Michael suggested, laughing. No, Jack retorted. You throw a fit when you don't get your way. We were just avoiding a scene. Keep telling yourself that, Michael replied. I'm here for Millie. You don't even believe she's out here, which means you only want to find the witch, Jack. Maybe you feel guilty about that. It's okay. I looked at my phone and finally answered Gareth's original question. It's nearly 1 o'clock. Okay, Gareth said. So we turn around and head back to camp at 2, right? We turn around when we've found Millie, Michael answered, marching forwards. Michael, we're not going to find her, Jack said. We're not going to find anything. We're turning around at 2 in the afternoon, and we'll get back to the camp at 3-ish, before it gets dark, okay? Yeah, I'll be hungry by then. I haven't even had lunch, Gareth said. I packed everything we need, Michael explained. There are crisps in your bag, Gaz. Eat up and shut up. Other than the sound of Gareth munching on the packet of ready salted crisps he found at the bottom of his rucksack, we were silent for a while. A long while. After about an hour, I looked at my phone screen. It's a few minutes past 2, I said. Come on, Michael, let's turn around. The sun will have almost set by the time we get back. We're nearly there, Michael insisted. It would be stupid to stop now. Well, I'm turning around, Gareth said, spinning on his heel and stomping past me. Screw this. Fine, go, wimp, Michael spat. We're all going, Jack said firmly. Trying to be the leader, eh? Michael asked, squaring up to Jack. You haven't got the balls. We don't have a leader, Jack replied, standing his ground. Stop being moronic and come back with us. Nah, I'll just do it on my own, Michael said, continuing on his way without us. We should go after him, I sighed. Nope, Jack said. I'm not going to get stuck in this forest after dark. And neither are you, Tommy. Come back with us. Michael will turn around when he realises he's on his own. I begrudgingly followed Gareth and Jack back to the campsite. I hoped they were right about Michael. I prayed that he would get cold feet and follow us. He didn't. The sky turned a mesmerising shade of orange, gently easing into darkness. It was an hour-long trek back to camp, but we escaped the woods before the black blanket of night fully descended upon us, and we returned to a calamitous scene. The site was deserted, and it told an unsettlingly incomplete story. 3 fully pitched tents and a smouldering pile of logs. 2 of the camping chairs were on their sides. In the dirt, there was an open packet of marshmallows. Some were partially buried in the mud.
Oh, thanks for ruining the snacks,
Gareth yelled at no one.
Where are they?
Jack asked, walking over to Rick's camper van.
Nope, they're not in here.
Answering Jack's question, a haunting sound echoed from the darkened depths of the forest. A razor-sharp scream pierced the air, and the 3 of us immediately threw our hands to our ears. That sounded like a woman. It must have been Stacy, I said.
Why was it so loud?
Gareth shuddered. Oh, Jack said, lowering his hands from his ears.
I get it.
What? I asked.
They're messing with us, Tommy. Michael, Rick and Stacy. They're messing with us. They planned this whole trip to scare us, Jack said, before starting to bellow.
Nice prank, guys. Come out.
Nothing.
Oh, they're really committing to the bit,
Gareth suggested, unconvincingly. Jack pointed to the forest, which lay only a few hundred yards from the field we'd chosen for our campsite.
They're hiding behind those trees and giggling, Jack explained. Screw 'em, I say. Let's eat some grub and wait for them to get bored. I'm freezing my tits off out here. And they must be cold too. We'll restart the campfire and they'll come crawling back.
Gareth and I followed Jack's lead, sitting in the camp chairs and proceeding to roast some marshmallows. Half an hour passed. Then an hour. Then another. And another.
It's 6:30. It's pitch black and freezing cold out there. Why would they still be pranking us? Gareth asked. I don't know and I don't really care, Gaz. Those brothers are idiots, Jack said, picking up the portable stove and throwing it at me. I feel like cooking us some proper food, champ.
I lifted my gaze from my lap. I'd been quietly contemplating everything Michael had told us. Nothing about the situation was sitting well with me. There was a cutting chill in the air. Something unnatural. The campfire had warmed us up, but I felt a different kind of coldness. I disregarded my instincts and did as Jack said. I wasn't being a pushover. I simply preferred his plan of staying away from the forest. I was scared. I was a coward. And I knew I was a coward because I knew that scream had been real. Just as I knew something had happened to Stacy, Rick, and possibly even Michael. I cooked sausages and clumsily packed them into buns, shakily passing the meagre meals to my friends. We ate in silence. Jack and Gareth weren't their usual chatty selves, and they wouldn't ever have admitted it, but I know they were frightened. It wasn't until 8 o'clock that anyone said anything.
Something's wrong, Gareth said, leaping out of his chair. We have to go and find them.
I pulled my earphones out, and Jack put his phone down.
It's cold and it's dark, Jack replied. You really want to go out there? They're not pranking us, Gareth said, trembling. We've waited for 5 hours. I think we should just go to bed and wait until morning, Jack said. It'll be light, so we'll be able to figure out what's happening. Plus, they'll probably have caved and slipped back into their tents. Rick and Stacy might even be camping on their own, you know?
How could any of them camp out there? They don't have supplies, I pointed out.
They left everything here, Jack. The place was a mess. And there was that scream. Gareth's right. Something's wrong. Well, what do you want to do? Jack asked. The two boys looked at me. I didn't want to march into the forest and save anyone. I wanted to go home. We need to phone our parents, I said. Yeah, great idea, Tommy. That's a sure way for us to never be allowed to do anything like this again, Gareth said. Something serious might have happened to them, I insisted. We have to be sensible, guys. I'm all for avoiding the forest, Tom, but we're not snitching to our parents, Jack said, shaking his head. 2 options. We go to sleep, or we search for them. I vote that we search for them, Gareth said. I vote that we go to bed, Jack shrugged, turning to me. Deciding vote, Tommy. Michael's not here. This is finally a democracy. I stared at the campfire, wishing for Rick, Stacy and Michael to emerge from the trees with ginormous grins on their foolish faces. But they didn't, and I had to make a decision. I wanted to call my parents. I wanted to run back to Bali if necessary. I could have followed the dirt path to the main road. 5 hours, I reckoned. 5 hours to walk home. I wish I'd done that. But peer pressure is a supernatural force of its own. I voted to scour the woods for our missing friends. I might have been a coward, but I didn't like the idea of cosily sleeping in a tent while something unholy was happening at the heart of that forest. Guided by the torches that Michael had packed for us, we entered the woods. Jack and I had been scouts when we were younger, but we were not equipped for a night expedition without a map. We had no idea how to navigate the forest of Boland or track missing people. Instead, we were guided by adrenaline, boyish stupidity, and perhaps a smidge of bravery.
Stacy, you okay?
I called.
Rick!
Gareth shouted.
Michael!
Not a sound. Such a chilling night, but the air was still. However, I could feel wisps of wind, like winter's breath, crawling across my flesh. Nothing felt right. I could forgive Gareth and Jack for ignorantly running into the witch's forest, but I should have known better. Everyone from Bali knows better. "Ugh, this is hopeless," Gareth cried. "We should head—" "Oh!" Jack groaned, peeling something squelchy off the sole of his boot. "What is this?" Gareth and I slowly approached our crouching friend, casting our torchlights onto what he held in his hands. Gaz shuddered, before vomiting to the side. Oh! Jack immediately dropped the squishy object, shuddering as he returned to reality and finally realised what he'd picked up with his bare hands. A heart. No, 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 Jack cried. "We have to find them," I said calmly. I was stunned by my composure. I wasn't a coward after all. Well, it may have just been shock. If I were ever to see a therapist, I would probably know. But I'm sure they'd have me committed to a hospital if I were ever to tell them the story that I'm about to tell you. We were boys, and boys don't like to appear weak. They follow the crowd. They follow a leader. In the absence of Michael, I seem to have assumed that role. As we marched onwards, my body surged with a renewed sense of confidence. I hadn't felt that way since the age of 6, before my grandpa and father had traumatised me into a shell. But I wish I'd remained a frightened lamb, rather than the moron who decided to dive deeper into the woods. What was that?" Gareth whispered. "What was what?" I asked, as we continued to walk through the blackened forest. I heard something behind me, Gareth said. I stopped walking and turned around, casting the torchlight onto my two friends. The colour left my face, and any ounce of courage swiftly left my body. I screamed. There was a figure behind Jack. A pale woman strolling between the trees.
Help!
She weakly wheezed. It wasn't the witch. It was Stacey. The three of us rushed over to her, and Gareth jumped forwards, cushioning her fall as her knobbly knees buckled. "What happened?" Jack asked, kneeling beside her. I was relieved to see that she didn't seem to have a cavernous hole in her chest, but we knew we hadn't imagined the heart on the forest floor. It came from somewhere. Regardless, Stacey did not look physically well. Her face was grey, as if the blood had been drained from her body.
Rick,
she sobbed, pressing her face into Jack's shirt.
He disappeared.
What do you mean? I asked. Where did he go?
We were at the camp, Stacey sniffled. He said he heard something. It seemed like one of his mean jokes. He said she was calling to him. He said he had to find her.
Who? Gareth asked.
Millie,
Stacey whispered. How did you end up out here? Did you follow him? Jack asked. Stacey nodded.
Yeah, I saw something. I don't know. Please, we have to go.
No, we have to find Rick and Michael, I said. She shook her head.
They're gone, Tommy.
Gareth and Jack were spiralling. We were only children. It's hard to see that when you're still young, but I understood for a fleeting moment. Understood how small and fragile we were. Even Stacey, who had seemed so grown up earlier in the day. We need to keep moving, I said. Where do you think he went?
Rick,
Stacey whined. Ignoring my question, she motioned towards her chest.
With his hands, he tore out his...
The four of us fell silent. She didn't need to finish her sentence. We finally knew whose heart lay on the ground. We didn't, however, expect her to say what she said next.
And after he did that, he carried on walking, she sobbed.
What? Jack asked.
No, where's his body, Stacey? Listen to me, she pleaded, assuming a fetal position on the ground. Rick didn't die. He tore his heart out and walked away.
That's impossible, Gareth timidly whispered. We still need to find Michael, I stated. Stacey sat upright and screamed at me.
You don't know what's out there.
I sighed. Stacey, you saw something awful, but...
Not that, she interrupted. I saw something else. I want to go home,
Gareth cried, and Jack hugged him. So does Michael, I said. Whatever Stacey saw, he's still out there. And he's our friend. We have to save him. Jack stopped hugging Gareth, and he walked slowly towards me. A volatile concoction of disgust, rage, fear, and sadness brewed beneath the surface of my friend's eyes. He was on the verge of erupting.
Rick's dead, Tom. And Michael isn't here. For all we know, that little psycho is the one who did this. He's the reason we're all here, isn't he?
Jack pointed out.
There's always been something wrong with him. I'm not going to risk my life for that monster. Nobody else is dying tonight. That doesn't explain how Rick survived, I replied. That doesn't explain what Stacy saw. We have to go, Stacy pleaded, stumbling to her feet and tugging at Gareth's sleeve. Jack whispered to me, "Look, Tommy, Stacy's got PTSD or something. I don't know. Wake up. Rick didn't rip his heart out and walk away. Like Gareth said, that's impossible." "No. Something else did it to him," I muttered, wrestling with the terror that was clawing at the surface of my mind. In a burst of movement that startled me, Jack shoved me to the ground. After casting him a perplexed look, I immediately pulled myself to my feet. "Guys!" Gareth protested. "No!" Jack shouted. "Are you really trying to say what I think you're trying to say, Tommy?" I held up my hands. "Look, I know you don't believe." "There is no witch! Has everybody lost their minds?" Jack belted at the top of his lungs. Filling the soundless void after his outburst, there was the faint sound of humming. The boys and I stopped and listened, but Stacy looked bewildered, wiping the tears from her face and watching us exchange horrified looks. I recognised the tune. The voice. "Millie!" Gareth whimpered, sobbing. "That was her favourite song," I cried. "She was always told off for humming it in class." "What? What are you saying?" Stacy asked. "I don't hear anything. This is all in your heads. This is exactly the sort of nonsense that Rick was saying before he—" "Michael," Jack said. "It has to be Michael. He's toying with us." "It isn't Michael," Stacy insisted. "We have to leave this place." "Oh, I agree," Jack replied. "We're going." "Screw you, Michael. Screw you. You guys take Stacy back to camp. I have to keep going," I said. What was propelling me forwards? The farther we walked, the sicker I felt. However, as we vanished into the barbaric belly of Boland, I felt compelled to find whatever I was trying to find. It wasn't Michael. I knew that much. Stacy wailed. "No, Tommy, please. I wouldn't be able to live with the thought of leaving you on your own. Please, don't make me come with you. We need to go back to the camp." "Come on, Tom," Jack said, placing a hand on my shoulder and speaking more gently. "You've done enough for him. You don't have to keep going. You're not under his spell anymore." With tears in my eyes, I smiled at my dear friend and said something that I wouldn't understand until later. "I'm sorry." I kept walking, and I knew that the others would follow. They did not protest, but Stacy continued to cry. The boys and I followed the siren call of Millie's hum. A few minutes later, we saw it, something none of us had really expected to see. A house, little more than a derelict shed, situated in a hidden corner of the forest, was an abominable abode. "What is this house doing out here?" Gareth asked. "I don't like it," Jack whispered. "The humming is coming from there," I said. "It's a trap," Stacy said. "Millie's not really in there, and you know it. You know it, Tom. Stop this." "I have to go inside," I said. I was not possessed.
I did not hear the cackling voice of some sinister witch in my head. There were no demons instructing me to commit atrocities. No, I retained control of my body and mind. But still, I was not myself. I was filled with an urge to go into that haunted hellhole. I started to walk towards the front door, but Stacey shoved past me, still bawling her eyes out. I realised she had Gareth's torch in her hand. "Let me go first," I remember her crying as she sprinted towards the door. She was protecting us. She was the adult. We all thought that at the time. But, as I said, she was only 19. A child. Just like us. The frightened girl clutched the door handle in one of her hands, shaking as she did so, and she called out, "Millie? Michael? Are you in there?" Gareth, Jack and I stood a few yards behind her. We waited with bated breath, and I wondered what could possibly lurk inside. Stacey opened the door, revealing nothing but darkness. She slowly lifted her torch, and we all breathed a collective sigh of relief. It was just a house. A compact, lightless, seemingly abandoned house. Stacey stood in a narrow hallway with doors lining either side, and there was a painting on the wall at the end. I couldn't quite distinguish the picture from a distance, but it looked familiar. Stacey shone her light onto each of the doors and called for Millie and Michael again. Faster than any gust of wind could have carried it, the front door slammed behind her. She screamed. "Stacey!" Gareth yelled, lunging at the door. He and Jack began ramming their shoulders into it, and the torch fell from my limp hands. "It's just a house," I told myself. "Rick, Michael, and Stacey are pranking us. That heart was a joke shop prop. It wasn't real." "Tommy!" Jack shouted, slamming into the door that wouldn't budge. "Help us!" I snapped out of it and joined my friends. Eventually, the latch snapped and the door flew open. Jack led the way, and I followed, too mentally broken to remember to pick up my fallen torch. The three of us stepped into the house. We knew that Stacey and Michael were gone, just like Rick and Millie. We hadn't accepted it. Or maybe we were drawn inside by that same force, the thing that hummed at us. After all, if I were possessed, would I really know? "Stacey!" Jack shouted. "Which door, Stacey?" She did not respond. The house had a single floor, and there was only one hallway, with 6 doors. "A room at a time," Jack said, opening the first door on his left. Gareth and I cowered behind him, watching as he illuminated the first room. There was nothing in there but a stack of rucksacks, the belongings of our missing friends. "They're here," Gareth whispered. "They have to be here." Jack quietly closed the door, and we swiveled around to face the opposite one. It opened onto a bedroom. There were scribblings on the walls in some inhuman language, but our friends were not there. 4 more rooms. With each door we opened, my throat seemed to close a little more. The second door on the left offered nothing but a book on the floor of an empty room. Jack cast his torchlight onto it. "The Pied Piper of Barley" was the title on the front cover.
Where are you? Gareth asked the empty space. Jack clasped a palm over our friend's mouth and, with his torch-holding hand, he raised a finger to his lips. Gareth nodded, and we shuffled silently across the corridor. It was the second door on the right that gave Jack reason to hesitate. He uncertainly wrapped his fingers around the door handle.
Wait, Jack said. I don't... Something about this room. Do you hear that?
Hear what? I asked feebly. Of its own accord, the fourth door flew open. There, in the centre of the room, stood Stacy, with her face contorted in a way that defied all the laws of nature. Her eye sockets were two black chasms. She was gone. She looked as if she had stared into the face of fear itself. Stacy lifted her arm to shoulder level and stretched her fingers towards us. She clearly wanted help, wanted death. "Stacy!" Gareth cried, squeezing between Jack and me. As he ran into the room, our friend knocked the torch out of Jack's hand.
"Gaz, wait!"
Jack screamed. The door slammed behind him. Silence followed. Not a scream, not a peep. Our final torch was gone, and we had been plunged into complete darkness. I was too afraid to walk outside and find mine. Jack fiddled with the fourth door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Neither of us had the energy left to fight the force orchestrating our torture. I realised I still had my phone, so I slid it from my pocket. I used the flashlight to find Jack, who was leaning with his back against the fourth door. He had his hands on his knees.
"They're not making a sound in there," he said. "Nobody leaves this house, do they, Tommy?"
"I don't think so," I solemnly replied, casting the light onto the third right-hand door. "2 more rooms, Jack. Tom, Millie is gone. Rick is gone. Stacy is gone. And now Gareth." Jack stopped, stifling his tears. "Michael is gone too. You know that. I paused. "He's here." Jack nodded. "Yeah. And he'll be messed up like everyone else. Look, I heard the humming. I saw Stacy's face. I believe, okay? I believe in the witch. You and I can still make it out of here." I ignored my only remaining friend and walked over to the third door on the right. We'd reached the end of the hallway, and I remembered something. The painting. I slowly lifted my phone, lighting the canvas. It was a portrait of a pond, with 3 figures standing beside it. A boy, a girl, and an old man. My grandpa, Sammy, and me. A painting of that day, that direful day. In the picture, my grandpa was furiously clutching my wrist. The brush strokes captured the horrifying expression he'd worn on his face as he warned me of the Pendle witch. "It's me, Jack. That's me in the painting," I whispered. "What?" Jack asked, not looking at the artwork. Let's go, Tom." I had to know. I reached for the door handle to the 5th room and lightly pushed it open. Inside, there was a boy standing silently, eyeing a child who lay at his feet. "Rick," I gently whispered.
My light was locked onto his formidable figure as the big brother shuffled around to look at me. There was a bloody hole ripped through his jumper, and he revealed a face even ghastlier than the one we had seen on Stacy. And like her, Rick did not look as if he had seen the face of fear. He did not look scared at all, in fact. Beneath the black, lifeless holes, where his eyes used to be, he wore a toothy, bloody grin that stretched from ear to ear. I still see him raising a finger to his lips and uttering a shushing sound. I remember his wheezy laugh as he pointed to a spot on the floor below him. Unable to speak, I moved my phone light onto the spot in question. At his feet, there lay the mostly massacred body of Michael. My friend was missing his limbs and his eyes, but his sockets weren't black holes like the ones that Stacy and Rick had. They were bloody wounds. Claw marks ran down his face, and my twitching, half-dead friend was also pointing at something. I found her, Michael groaned. The witch made Henderson do it. I peered around the side of the door frame, and, trembling, I moved my light into the corner of the room. It illuminated a pile of bones in hiking gear. Millie. Ah! Ready to leave that place and never return, I turned to find that Jack was gone. The fifth door slammed in my face. The brothers were gone. Jack was gone. I was alone in the witch's corridor. I could feel a weight lifting from my mind. As if I had been released from a trance, I finally wondered why I had entered that house. I spun around and headed towards the front door, but something unseen seized my body. I couldn't move. The sixth and final door creaked open. The third door on the left. I found my feet swiveling around before carrying me towards my grave, and I glanced at the painting one last time. 3 figures weren't there. There was a sinister silhouette behind the painted trees. It moved out of sight. Moments later, I was standing in the last room, and the door closed behind me. It was horribly dark, and my arm was moving. I couldn't stop it. My phone light was creeping across the walls, slowly making its way towards something at the back of the room. No, I cried, trying desperately to stop myself. I didn't want to see what the unholy force wanted me to see. I could hear breathing. I wasn't alone in that room. With only seconds to spare, I realised that I couldn't move my limbs, but I could move my lips. Wait, I begged. Why did you let William Henderson live? My arm stopped. The breathing stopped. Whilst I had control of my limbs, I took the opportunity to drop my phone. It landed face up, so the flashlight was pressed against the floor. Made a deal, a voice whispered. It wasn't the voice of a woman. It wasn't the voice of a man. I often call it the devil, but I do that to help myself sleep at night. Truthfully, whatever was in that room terrified me more than Satan. What deal? I asked. I'll never forget her blackened outline as she moved her sickly form in front of the room's singular window. Scarce moonlight, wasn't scarce enough to completely conceal her haunting appearance. 7 foot tall, skeletal limbs, and a head far larger than that of any human. I thank my lucky stars that I dropped my phone. Would I be like Stacy or Rick if I'd seen her in the light?
We must feed.
That was all the horrific hag said before I fainted. But I knew what she wanted. The witch had already told me what I needed to do. The book on the floor. The Pied Piper of Barley. The ancient abomination would let me live, but I had to continue what William Henderson had started. When he told the villagers of Barley the tale of the witch, he had been leading them to her, and his descendants had done the same. The Hendersons hadn't provided exact directions to her lair, but all it requires is a spark, an idea. Of course, everyone in Barley knows that she lives in the forest, but not everyone feels the pull. It only works on the minds of the lost and the broken. Mr. Henderson ignited that spark in Michael. 2 lost souls. He planted the idea of the witch, and Michael did the rest. I like to think our dear old history teacher did not willingly lead his daughter to the slaughter, just as Michael did not willingly lead his friends to that house. Mr. Henderson was merely a fool who learned the hard way what his ancestor had really done to make it out of the Boland house alive. And, like the Hendersons, I knew what needed to be done. When I woke after the unfathomable events at the witch's house, I was back at the campsite. I rang my parents and told them that everyone had gone missing in the woods. I told them they tried to find Millie, but I stayed in the tent. To this day, my friends remain missing. I'm 27 years old. It's been 13 years since that fateful camping excursion, and the families of my friends still hunt for their children. But they don't know where to look. I could have told them where to go, but the witch would not have taken kindly to an angry mob. I misdirected the police, and the bodies of my friends were never found. Not everyone in Barley is prey. Some of us are just storytellers, the witches' Pied Pipers. And I still see Mr. Henderson in the village from time to time. I think he knows what I've become. I think he knows what I've done. He shames me with a passing glare, but no more than he shames himself. Heed my warning. The Pendle witch is real. She's something far older than you or me, and she's hungry, very hungry. You know why I've told you this story. You finally understand, don't you? It's an idea, and I have to plant it.